10. Charles Dion McDowell. In late 2018, the Escambia County Sheriff's Office in Florida arrested 31-year-old Charles Dion McDowell on a slew of drug-related charges, including possession of meth and cocaine with intent to sell. He was also accused of possessing drug equipment and fleeing from police. The agency posted the man's crime details and mugshot on Facebook, but people were more entertained by his massive neck than by the allegations he faced. The humorous comment started immediately, with one social media user writing that McDowell should sell advertising space on his neck. Another commentator joked about the suspect being up to his neck in charges. There was also a comment telling people to leave the man alone, because next time it could be you. McDowell's mugshot was shared over 250,000 times within a week of his arrest. Then he was arrested again in Alabama after cops laid spike strips down to disable his vehicle during a high-speed chase. He was charged with more drug offenses and driving with a revoked license. Naturally, the jokes about his neck continued. The unexpected attention created opportunities for McDowell, including talks about a possible MMA or boxing appearance. He also became Instagram famous. Trouble found McDowell again in early 2019, when his bond in Florida was revoked due to his Alabama charges. His stardom was short-lived, and he seems to have remained mostly out of the spotlight since then. 9. Michelle Allen. In late 2008, a mugshot of a woman in a cow costume went viral. It was strange to begin with, but what made it even weirder was the fact that it wasn't even Halloween. The arrest happened over a month before Halloween, when police in Middletown, Ohio, responded to complaints about a woman in a cow costume blocking traffic. They arrived to find the familiar face of Michelle Allen, who'd been arrested nearly 50 times before, according to Major Mark Hoffman. In addition to obstructing traffic, Allen allegedly chased children and urinated on someone's porch. The police report stated that she smelled strongly of alcohol and threatened the arresting officer. As a result, Allen was charged with disorderly conduct. Hoffman told local station Fox 19 that when she appeared at her arraignment hearing, she also challenged people to suck her udders. Police later learned that Allen was wearing the cow costume as part of a promotional job for a local haunted trail, and that an employee came by to pick up the cow mask. However, they reportedly didn't get the rest of the costume back because Allen refused to remove it during her 30-day jail stay. 8. Matthew McNally and Joey Miller. After receiving a call about two men with painted faces robbing an apartment in 2009, police in Carroll, Iowa, went out looking for the culprits. Just a few blocks away from the crime scene, they pulled over a vehicle matching a witness's description of the thieves' getaway car. The officers were shocked to see that both the driver and passenger's faces were covered in permanent marker. Cops are used to encountering unusual sights and people, but this was the first of its kind for the responding officers. Police Chief Jeff Kaler seemed utterly baffled, telling CNN that he'd never heard of someone using Sharpies to alter their appearance. The poorly disguised suspects were identified as 23-year-old Matthew McNally and 20-year-old Joey Miller. Detectives theorized that they targeted the home they were accused of burglarizing because one of the men suspected his girlfriend of cheating on him with the man who lived there. Kaler said that alcohol was thought to be involved, and that the attempted break-in may have been an impulsive drunk decision in hopes of scaring the resident. The judge overseeing the case ultimately dropped the charges against McNally and Miller due to a lack of evidence. In all fairness, the men were unarmed when the police pulled them over. There were no signs of them actually entering the intended victim's apartment, and nobody was injured. The biggest disappointment to the outcome is the fact that we'll never know why they scribbled on their faces with permanent markers. 7. Kevin Gibson. On April 20th, 2016, Miami Beach police questioned a man who was spotted drinking a Heineken beer in public. Officers searched him and found 70 grams of marijuana packed into small bags, presumably in preparation for customers celebrating 420. 59-year-old Kevin Gibson was charged with drinking in public, possession, and intent to sell, and subsequently spent the rest of the stoner holiday in jail. Many wondered why he was sporting a literal half-beard in his mugshot, as if he'd been interrupted in the middle of shaving. A little over a year after Gibson first went viral, he was arrested again in 2017. This time he faced felony narcotics charges, but he had a long rap sheet dating back to before his beard caught nationwide attention. His lengthy list of convictions includes burglary, robbery, grand theft, kidnapping, disorderly intoxication, battery, trespassing, loitering, and dealing cocaine and marijuana. A booking photo from when Gibson was incarcerated between the two more recent arrests shows that he gave up his unusual facial hair while in the custody of the Florida Department of Corrections. Nobody seems to know the story behind his wild look, but he sported the half-beard in more than one mugshot, indicating that he must prefer it for some reason. 6. James Miller. While out on patrol in the early morning hours after Halloween night in 2009, police in Oxford, Ohio spotted a vehicle driving the wrong way on a one-way street. They pulled the driver over and found a young man dressed as a breathalyzer machine who had an open can of Bud Light in his center console. In an ironic twist, he performed poorly on sobriety tests, and his blood alcohol level measured at 0.158, nearly twice the state's legal limit for driving. According to an arrest report, the officers also found what was left of a case of beer in the passenger seat and the trunk. 18-year-old James Miller was charged with underage drinking, DUI, open container, and a one-way street violation. He was booked for the offenses and was later released to his girlfriend. His mugshot shows his appropriately themed costume, which displayed 3 levels of sobriety: boring, life of the party, and totally tober. It also had a cleverly placed plastic tube with instructions that read, "Blow here." 5. James Feeblecorn. After seeing a man doing donuts in the main street of their small town in 2015, concerned residents in Randolph, New York called the police. 59-year-old James Feeblecorn was charged with DUI and several other offenses, but was released to a sober third party. The local press published news of his arrest along with a mugshot of Feeblecorn with an amused grin on his face. History repeated itself the very next day, when neighbors reported seeing the suspect doing donuts in his front yard. Feeblecorn told officers that he was trying to get rid of the grass in his front yard and was once again arrested, this time on a 4th-degree mischief charge. Instead of releasing him, the judge imposed bail and Feeblecorn was taken to jail. The local media once again published his booking photo, which shows an even bigger smile on his face. News stations and journalists outside the region started picking up on the story, with one blogger describing Feeblecorn as the Homer Simpson of drunk driving. 3 weeks later, he was in trouble yet again and was charged with violating an order of protection, according to WIVB. And, for a third time, Feeblecorn grinned for the camera in a situation where smiling is the last thing on most people's minds. 4. Robert Edward Burt. In Somerset County, Maine, 19-year-old Robert Edward Burt was ordered to serve 2 days behind bars for an operating under the influence charge in 2014. The young man had bailed himself out after his initial arrest months earlier, but the court ultimately determined that his debt to society included 48 hours in jail. When Burt showed up to do his time, he wore an orange t-shirt with his mugshot from his previous arrest on the front. The new photo that was taken as he was booked into jail will forever feature his old mugshot. Beneath the picture, his shirt bore the words Family Reunion 8/8-8/10-2014, suggesting that he may have had the chance to catch up with some relatives during his brief stint. Burt's clever display earned him a lot of attention on the internet. Luckily, he hasn't appeared in the news for any arrest since then, indicating that he's avoided adding a third mugshot to his collection. 3. Adam Roberts. It might be a bad idea to cover your face in tattoos if you're going to commit crimes, but Adam Roberts did exactly that before he became a suspect in a burglary case in 2013. The 24-year-old was accused of robbing 28 storage units by the police in his hometown of Godfrey, Illinois. The missing property included electronics, video game equipment, TVs, a refrigerator, fishing gear, paintings, antique furniture, and a sewing machine. Law enforcement released the suspect's mugshots in hopes that members of the public would remember buying things from him, which would help tie him to the stolen items. Commenting on Robert's distinctive skull tattoo covering most of his face, Madison County Sheriff's Captain Mike Dixon told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch that the unique ink was the oddest thing he'd seen in more than 20 years of working law enforcement. Roberts was charged with 3 counts of felony burglary in connection with the thefts. However, it's unclear whether anyone came forward with information about the crimes. 2. Sean Paul Melanakos. Police in Odessa, Texas responded to the scene of a crime in 2018 when they received a complaint about a man stealing from a thrift store. A customer had confronted 36-year-old Sean Paul Melanakos after noticing him trying to leave without paying for the merchandise he was carrying. Melanakos allegedly reacted by picking up a large rock and throwing it at the man. Fearing for his life, the customer pulled out a gun and fired 1 round, but luckily nobody was hurt. The civilian and his friend then chased Melanakos down and restrained him until the police arrived. According to the arrest report, the suspect initially gave a false name and birth date to responding officers. However, this wasn't his first brush with the law, and they eventually figured out who he really was. They also discovered that he had an arrest warrant for a parole violation and found methamphetamine in his possession. Following the shoplifting incident, he was charged with robbery, parole violation, possession of a controlled substance, and failure to identify. Most people aren't very happy when they get arrested, but Melanakos went viral for having an ecstatic open-mouthed grin in his mugshot. For reasons that nobody ever figured out, he looks genuinely happy in the photo. 1. Sarah Seawright. In 2015, 24-year-old Sarah Seawright became the latest person to earn the nickname Prison Bae for their attractive mugshots in recent years. She was arrested in Little Rock, Arkansas for failing to appear in court on a warrant for careless driving and driving without insurance. In her booking photo, the young woman looks more like she's about to go on a date rather than a holding center. Luckily, she cleared up her legal issues and was a free woman once again after agreeing to pay several $100s in fines for her original charges. Seawright's failure to appear charge was dismissed. However, these weren't her only brushes with the law. In 2012, she and a young man were arrested for armed robbery. The defendants were accused of pulling up to an acquaintance in a Target parking lot and offering him a ride, then driving behind the store and robbing him at gunpoint. For her role in the incident, Seawright pleaded guilty to 1 felony in exchange for getting the rest of her charges dropped and received 5 years of probation. Unfortunately, she's landed back in hot water with the law several times since her mugshot first launched her to fame. Seawright was arrested and extradited to Texas in 2021 for charges that law enforcement declined to disclose publicly, although it appears as though she was arrested again in 2022.
10. Careless driving. 37-year-old aspiring property developer James Bryan was hungover after spending the previous night drinking with a friend. However, he knew his parents were relying on him to drop their groceries off while they quarantined during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic. So he got into his Porsche and went about his errands near the English town of Boroughbridge. During the trip, Bryan plowed his car into 36-year-old cyclist and father of 2, Andrew Jackson, who died at the scene. Bryan was charged with causing Jackson's death by driving dangerously and initially denied his guilt in the case. Although he was not intoxicated at the time of the crash, authorities found traces of cocaine in his system. He claimed that the drug got into his bloodstream from kissing his girlfriend, but later admitted to taking it intentionally. Prosecutors accused Bryan of being distracted by social media on his phone when he barreled into the victim at 48 miles per hour or 77.2 kilometers per hour. Bryan argued that Jackson had swerved out in front of him, giving him no time to react. But an investigation determined that the bicycle wasn't in the car's path when it was hit. He admitted to causing Jackson's death by careless driving and not leaving enough room when he drove around the bicycle, but denied the dangerous driving allegations. In a surprising twist, a jury found Bryan not guilty of the latter offense. His sentencing for the death by careless driving charge is scheduled for October of 2022. 9. Preoccupied pilot. Pilot Amritpal Singh was flying his two-seat airplane in Colorado one night in 2015 when he lost control of the aircraft and crashed into a field. Unfortunately, the 29-year-old and his passenger both died in the accident. A National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) report found that Singh would have had to rely mostly on his instruments that night due to overcast weather. This is known as instrument meteorological conditions. However, limited visibility alone wasn't enough to explain the tragedy. The pilot still had about 7 miles or 11 kilometers of visibility, and the investigation revealed that the plane appeared to be operating normally when something went horribly wrong. Footage from a GoPro found near the wreckage showed that Singh and his passenger were taking selfies with their phones during the flight. They started snapping pictures during the takeoff and continued to do so throughout the flight. And they used the flash on their cameras, which most likely distracted and disoriented the pilot. During the mid-air photo shoot, the plane began to descend at 1,900 feet, 579 meters per minute. By the time Singh realized the aircraft was heading for the ground, it was too late for him to regain control. The NTSB report also noted that the pilot lacked the qualifications to fly at night with passengers. 8. Killer on the loose. A jail officer guarding a murder suspect at a Seattle hospital became distracted for just a few minutes, which allowed 19-year-old Giovanni D. Herron enough time to slip by unnoticed. The escape happened in 2018. After Herron was taken into custody on suspicion of shooting his 18-year-old girlfriend and leaving her to die in the wilderness. After firing a bullet into the woman's head, he allegedly stole her car and wallet before using her ATM card to withdraw cash. Herron was apprehended about a month after the murder and was taken to the hospital after repeatedly complaining of an illness, reportedly from taking drugs. He was secured to the bed with leg and wrist restraints that he managed to free himself from just moments before he fled the building. Once outside, Herron got into a lift car and began assaulting the driver. Luckily, an officer had noticed his absence and chased after him in time to stop him from doing any serious harm. But he had to shoot Herron in the shoulder to get him under control. The teen was treated for his gunshot wound and taken to jail. Herron now faces an escape charge in addition to the first-degree murder and weapon charges. He had been treated and released from the hospital twice in a 2-day span before he wound up there for a third time, leading prosecutors to suspect that he faked an illness until he finally got his chance to run. The outcome of Herron's case is unclear, but the ordeal that took place at the hospital compelled jail officials to heighten his security status. His bond was also doubled from $1 million to $2 million. 7. Wrong apartment. Former Dallas police officer Amber Geiger was arriving home from work on the night of September 6, 2018, when she lost track of which floor she was on and mistakenly entered the wrong apartment. Each unit was clearly labeled with its number, which would have been an easy way for her to tell that she was on the 3rd floor, rather than on the 4th floor where she lived. However, she wasn't paying enough attention to the numbers to realize this. She also didn't notice that there was a bright red doormat sitting in front of the door, far unlike the one she had in front of her own apartment. When Geiger opened the door and saw an unarmed African-American man she didn't recognize sitting on the sofa eating ice cream, she pulled out her service weapon and shot him twice in the chest. She soon realized her mistake and dialed 911. The victim, 26-year-old Botham Jean, died from his injuries. Geiger was initially arrested for manslaughter, but the charge was eventually upgraded to murder. Protests erupted as the nation grew increasingly fed up with the seemingly endless problem across America of cops shooting unarmed black men. At her trial, Geiger claimed that she thought she was at her apartment and mistook Jean for an intruder. Prosecutors argued that she missed the many obvious signs that she was on the wrong floor. They claimed that she entered the wrong home because she was distracted by a steamy text conversation she was having with her police partner and married lover, Martin Rivera. The pair had been romantically involved for about a year and were trying to arrange a rendezvous for later that night. Geiger's defense lawyer argued that Amber wasn't distracted by the flirtatious texts, but that she was simply on autopilot and acting out of habit on a floor that had a similar layout to the one she lived on. Even if this were the case, it still means she was too distracted to have the basic awareness of her surroundings that any person should. The court did not believe that just because she entered the wrong apartment, she had any reason to open fire. Geiger was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Her sentence is scheduled to run until 2029, but she could be paroled as early as 2024. 6. Distracting podcast. 59-year-old funeral director David Duckett's life was cut short one evening in 2019 when a young woman crashed her Fiat into his motorcycle on a highway near the English town of Grimsby. He was waiting at the back of a line of vehicles that had accumulated during the investigation of another crash, when 24-year-old schoolteacher Gemma Rutherford failed to see that traffic had stopped and hit the father of four. Rutherford was charged in connection with Duckett's death. Prosecutor Jeremy Evans said that she was going between 34 and 45 miles per hour, 54.7 to 72.4 kilometers per hour, when she tried to swerve out of the way, and accused her of being mentally distracted by a podcast she was listening to. Rutherford admitted that she failed to pay attention to traffic and took responsibility for her role in Duckett's death. The judge overseeing the case imposed an 8-month prison sentence, suspended for 2 years. She was also bound by a curfew for 6 months with electronic monitoring and was banned from driving for 2 years as well. 5. Cleaning fluid mishap. In August of 2022, 3 residents at the Atria Park Senior Assisted Living Facility in San Mateo, California, unknowingly drank cleaning fluid and 2 of them died. They thought that they had been served cranberry juice by the facility's dietary staff, but after drinking the alkaline liquid, they were rushed to the hospital with severe blisters and bleeding. One patient, 93-year-old Peter Schroeder Jr., languished in the hospital for 12 days in excruciating pain before he passed away. His daughter Susan spent his final agonizing moments with him and later told NBC News about how hard it was to see her father suffering. An investigation found that a kitchen worker had filled a pitcher with the cleaning fluid with plans to use it for its intended purpose. However, the employee got distracted by a disruption in the dining room and unintentionally served the solution as cranberry juice. In the wake of the tragedies, a facility spokesperson announced that the employees involved had been suspended pending the outcome of an internal investigation. The company reassured the public that it was complying with law enforcement and the local Department of Social Services, who were also reviewing the case. Schroeder's surviving relatives have filed a civil lawsuit against Atrius Park, alleging negligence and elder abuse. The family's lawyer, Catherine Stebner, told NBC that understaffing is a chronic issue at the facility. She accused the company of deliberately keeping a short-handed staff to maximize its profits. She explained that there weren't enough workers on duty to safely handle the distraction that drew the employee away from the cleaner they had just poured and came back to, thinking it was just cranberry juice. San Mateo District Attorney Steve Wagstaff told the news outlet that he was reviewing the police investigation's findings to determine if charges for elder abuse or any other crimes will be filed. 4. Deadly digging machine. Estelle Davis was crossing an intersection on her way to work in Brooklyn's East New York neighborhood in 2021 when a backhoe struck her in the head with its shovel and then ran her over. The 61-year-old home health aide died in the freak tragedy, leaving both detectives and her distraught loved ones with more questions than answers. Video footage shows Davis looking down at an object in her hand, most likely her phone, as the construction vehicle drives in reverse and knocks her flat on her back. She was dragged for several feet before the backhoe came to a stop. Authorities spent nearly a year investigating the incident to determine whether a crime was committed or if it was simply a tragic accident. In early 2022, they charged the backhoe driver and the construction site foreman with manslaughter, resulting from their alleged failure to take proper safety precautions. The case is still ongoing today. 3. Distracted driver. 51-year-old Howard E. Heinzelmeyer was driving a work-issued Dodge Ram pickup truck one morning in July of 2022 when he crashed into a Toyota Camry, killing both the driver and passenger. Heinzelmeyer rear-ended the Camry, causing it to spin out of control and hit a concrete barrier. He allegedly told Florida state troopers that he had dropped his phone onto the floor of his truck and was looking for it when the crash occurred. The accident report notes that the driver was operating the vehicle in a careless or negligent manner. According to the most recent update, no criminal charges have been filed against Heinzelmeyer, but the investigation is ongoing and could result in charges. Attorneys representing the surviving family members of Tracy Carson and Daniel Whitfield, the men killed in the crash, have filed wrongful death suits against Heinzelmeyer and his employer for alleged negligence. Both cases requested jury trials and unspecified damages. 2. Nude sunbather. An Austrian woman was apparently trying to get an even tan one summer day in 2014 when she laid face down with her naked rear end and legs hanging out the window of her third-floor apartment in Vienna. Gregory Shakaki was one of the many drivers who noticed her unclothed body in plain view. He later told the Daily Mail that he thought he was suffering from sunstroke when he first saw the sultry sunbather. Another motorist, Michael Kianast, told the press that he saw two male drivers get into a fender bender after shifting their gaze away from the road ahead of them to look at the woman. He said that one man had asked the driver of the vehicle who hit him if he was watching where he was going when he crashed. The other driver reportedly replied, "No, I was distracted," and pointed up at the naked woman. And the man who was hit said, "Oh, right, I see what you mean." Police arrived to find cars caught in a traffic jam outside the building. But by then, the woman had gone inside and closed her windows. 1. Retired cop rescue. In 2022, a motorist in Mooresville, North Carolina, was extremely lucky that there was a retired police officer close by when they somehow drove their vehicle into Lake Norman. Emergency workers responded to the scene after receiving a call about the submerged driver and were relieved to find that they had already been rescued. The car quickly began to sink after it drifted off the road and veered straight into the water. A former NYPD officer, who just happened to be nearby, jumped into the lake, unbuckled the driver's seatbelt, and helped them out of the vehicle to bring them to safety. Authorities released limited details about the accident while they investigated, including the cause. However, they took the opportunity to caution the public to follow safety rules when behind the wheel, and to avoid driving distracted. Police may have suspected that distracted driving played a role in causing the car to roll into the water. 10. Jarvis and Jarvia Carr. In a robbery gone wrong, 19-year-old Jarvis Carr held a victim at gunpoint one day in 2022 while an accomplice attempted to steal their safe at their home in Deland, Florida. The victim had reportedly invited the pair inside to discuss the purchase of a scooter when the suspects decided to burglarize the home. Things didn't go as planned, so Jarvis and his co-conspirator allegedly tried to steal a truck. But the owner fought back and set off the vehicle's panic alarm, causing the suspects to flee. Jarvis called his sister, 20-year-old Jarvia, to come pick him up. By then, law enforcement was already on their way. Jarvia later told detectives that when Jarvis got in her SUV, he told her to just drive. She also said that they switched seats at some point during the ensuing pursuit. The police gave chase as the vehicle ran a red light and hit a curb. Jarvis attempted to run and threw a backpack into some bushes, but lost his shoes. He surrendered while Jarvia remained in her vehicle and complied with law enforcement's commands. Inside Jarvis's backpack, officers found 40 grams of methamphetamine. Jarvis faced a slew of charges, including home invasion, robbery with a firearm, armed trafficking in methamphetamine, aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer, carjacking, fleeing or attempting to elude law enforcement, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and resisting an officer. Jarvia was also hit with a laundry list of charges, including accessory to robbery, fleeing law enforcement, and violation of felony probation. 9. Catherine and Andrew Sue. Catherine Sue was 18 years old when she became the legal guardian of her 13-year-old brother, Andrew, in 1987. Their father had died from cancer in 1986, and their mother was brutally murdered in a robbery gone wrong the following year, leaving the siblings on their own in Chicago. Andrew became close with Catherine's live-in boyfriend, Robert O'Dubain, who acted as a father figure to the teen. But Catherine had the most influence over her brother by far. And when she decided she wanted O'Dubain out of the picture, she persuaded her younger brother to do her dirty work. In 1993, he flew to Chicago from his college in Providence, shot O'Dubain dead, and then went on the run. After living a squeaky clean life as a top scholar with no history of trouble, the 19-year-old had done something even many seasoned criminals would never even consider. A few weeks after the murder, detectives apprehended Andrew at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport with $65,000 cash and some of O'Dubain's IDs. By then, Catherine was behind bars for her suspected role in the crime, and Andrew was on his way to see her. He soon confessed to the murder, telling detectives that he wasn't after a portion of the victim's life insurance settlement like they suspected, but that he committed the gruesome act out of family loyalty, a value that had been drilled into his head as a child growing up in a traditional South Korean family. Andrew was convicted of murder and received an 80-year sentence. He'll be eligible for parole in 2032, and possibly even earlier due to a new Illinois law that allows some people who were convicted of murder before age 21 to go on parole after 20 years. Catherine was also convicted of murder and received a life sentence with no possibility of parole. 8. Shauna and Curtis Culver. One day in 2018, 44-year-old Brian Keith Hawkins entered the KCRA news station studio in Redding, California, and confessed to his role in a cold case murder from 1993. He admitted that he and a pair of siblings, 46-year-old Shauna Culver and 45-year-old Curtis Culver, set up 19-year-old Frank McAllister after hearing that he had received a lawsuit settlement. The trio robbed McAllister, then stabbed him and bludgeoned him in the head. Hawkins said that the guilt of what he had done, along with his Christian faith, are what compelled him to come forward. He described living with his crime as a form of daily torment, and said that every day was a nightmare. After the interview, he turned himself into the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. In addition to hoping that the victim's family could someday forgive him, Hawkins also apologized to the community. McAllister's skeletal remains were found in a wooded area in 1994. Police questioned Hawkins and the Culvers, but had no solid evidence linking them to the case. It wasn't until Hawkins confessed in 2018 that any arrests were made. He was convicted of murder and received a sentence of 25 years to life, while the Culvers were both found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and each received a 35-year sentence. 7. Nicholas and Melissa Zielinski. The father of 22-year-old Carl Mitchell Henderson arrived home from grocery shopping in Lino Lake, Minnesota one day in 2020 and found himself face to face with two home intruders, a man and a woman who threatened to take him out. The pair fled in an SUV, and the homeowner found his son face down in a pool of blood in his bedroom. Police traced neighbors' home surveillance footage of the SUV and DNA left behind at the scene to 44-year-old Nicholas Walter Zielinski. Cell phone searches led them to the suspect's sister and accomplice, 48-year-old Melissa Zielinski. Location information from both siblings' phones put them both near the crime scene on the day of Henderson's murder, and his father recognized them as the home intruders. Nicholas admitted in court that he and Melissa went to Henderson's home to collect on a debt, although the nature of the supposed debt was never specified. Melissa allegedly tied the man up, but he broke free and charged at Nicholas, who shot him in the chest during an ensuing struggle. The siblings were found guilty for their alleged roles in Henderson's death. Nicholas was sentenced to 19 years in prison, and Melissa received a 30-year sentence. 6. Nathaniel Gann and Bray Hansen. On July 19, 2007, a teenager named Bray Hansen dialed 911 and said that a masked gunman had shot her stepfather in his San Diego home. Officers arrived to find 63-year-old criminal defense attorney Timothy McNeil dead with 4 gunshot wounds, 2 of which struck him in the head. They found Hansen with her hands bound behind her back with zip ties. She claimed that she had used her tongue to dial 911. At first, authorities believed that Hansen and McNeil were victims of a robbery gone wrong, but when they questioned her, her story began to fall apart, and it became obvious that she wasn't telling the truth. Witnesses described seeing a man resembling her brother, 20-year-old Nathaniel Gann, fleeing the scene. The siblings were locked up on suspicion of murdering McNeil, and a jailhouse informant soon came forward and claimed that Gann had been talking about the crime. The informant knew information that only someone at the murder scene would have known, and the evidence against the brother-sister duo continued to stack up. McNeil's relatives accused Hansen of being an attention seeker who needed to be in the spotlight at all times, and claimed that she murdered her stepfather because she expected to receive a large inheritance. Her lawyer, on the other hand, argued that Hansen had tried to call off the plot, but that Gann forced her to go through with it. Hansen was convicted of first-degree murder, with the special circumstance of lying in wait, and will spend the rest of her life behind bars. Gann was also found guilty of murder and received a sentence of 25 years to life. 5. Tiesh Annette Rue and Alexander Rue Jr. Family members of Leon Harrison Jr. reported him missing in Georgetown, South Carolina on March 9, 2017. By then, he had been missing for around 2 weeks. His body was found 2 days later, floating in the Black River. Harrison's hands and feet were bound with speaker wire, but his remains were so decomposed that a medical examiner was unable to determine a cause of death. Detectives soon learned that the victim and his wife, 38-year-old Tiesh Annette Rue, were having marital problems around the time of his disappearance. They argued the last night he was seen alive. A search of Rue's home found that some large sections of carpet had been cut away and removed from the couple's bedroom, and a DNA test proved that bloodstains at the site belonged to Harrison. The suspect's father and brother, Alexander Rue Sr. and Jr., were seen on surveillance footage buying cleaning products at Walmart shortly before all 3 of them turned their phones off. They also allegedly gave false information to police when they were brought in for questioning. 61-year-old Alexander Rue Sr. was found guilty of obstruction of justice and received a suspended 8-year prison sentence with credit for time served. Alexander Rue Jr. and T.S. Rue were convicted of murder and were both sentenced to 37 years in prison, followed by 8 years for obstruction of justice. 4. Farzana Latif Saki and Iftikhar Latif Sadi. 19-year-old Mumtaha Karina and 16-year-old Salnabil Tasnim were brutally murdered in an acid attack in 2010 in Shadagram City, Bangladesh. Karina never lived to see her wedding day. Investigators were quick to point the blame at her cousin, 35-year-old Farzana Latif Saki, and Saki's brother, 33-year-old Iftikhar Latif Sadi, as the suspected killers. The siblings had been staying with Karina's family in anticipation of her wedding when the victims were attacked in their sleep. Prosecutors accused Saki of then going to the bathroom and pouring acid on herself in an attempt to pass as a victim. Saki's lawyer argued that an attacker would never deliberately throw acid on themselves, and that none of the witnesses who testified had actually seen the attack. But the court didn't buy it. Saki and Sadi were found guilty of killing the two young women and were sentenced to life in prison. They each received an additional 7-year sentence under a different section of the law and were ordered to pay fines. 3. Todd Jones and Laurel Hoffman. In a shocking case that can only be described as truly unique, a brother and sister from Cleveland, Ohio, found themselves in hot water with the law for destroying a historic protected tree in 2022. Authorities accused 56-year-old Todd Jones and 54-year-old Laurel Hoffman of felling a more than 200-year-old black walnut tree in a local park and selling the wood, which is rare and known to fetch high prices. At 5.5 feet, or 1.7 meters wide, and with a circumference of 17 feet, 5.2 meters, it was one of the biggest trees of its kind in the state. Police charged both siblings with grand theft and falsification. They both told local reporters that they believed the tree was on family-owned property, and that there was no ill intent, and that they shouldn't be facing charges. Hoffman and Jones said that their father had always described the tree as his, and that it was odd how park staff didn't raise an issue while they were cutting the tree down. Authorities didn't seem to know that someone had chopped the black walnut tree until after the deed was done. By then, the timber had already been sold to a logging company for $2,000. The siblings' claims of making an honest mistake are believable. After all, the tree stood only 7 feet, 2.1 meters outside their property line, but they were nevertheless convicted of theft and ordered to pay $20,000 to the local parks department. 2. Demarius and Bosnia Taylor. After getting into a street fight one day in Texarkana, Texas in 2020, 21-year-old Bosnia Taylor allegedly challenged her adversaries to a rematch. She and her brother, 20-year-old Demarius, went to an agreed-upon fight spot with a group of friends and came face-to-face with another group of young people. A brawl ensued, and at some point, Bosnia reportedly told Demarius to shoot someone. Witnesses claimed that they saw him pull out a gun and shoot 16-year-old Notorious Crabtree, who died from his injuries. As the victim's relatives rushed to intervene, the siblings fled in vehicles with the group they had come to the fight with. Police found Crabtree's body after receiving a call about a gunshot victim, and they soon caught up with the Taylor siblings. Witnesses told detectives about social media messages Bosnia had sent challenging the second fight, and were also told that she had been beaten up earlier that day. Bosnia pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and received an 18-year prison sentence, and Demarius was sentenced to life in prison. 1. Rayanne Corte Griffith and Devon Corte Griffith. After receiving an alert about shots fired in the early morning hours on May 23, 2021, Las Vegas police found 21-year-old Sarif El-Amin II in a crashed SUV, suffering from a gunshot wound to the back. He was rushed to the hospital, where he died from his injuries. The shooting stemmed from some sort of altercation involving 21-year-old Rayanne Corte Griffith, her brother, 22-year-old Devon Corte Griffith, and 24-year-old Daniel Pirtle Torrance. Rayanne reportedly told police that she and El-Amin were riding together to her apartment when they saw Devon with a group of people. Without naming names, she said that they heard a gunshot and then saw El-Amin flee the scene with her phone in his vehicle. She said that Devon went to the scene of the crash and retrieved her phone and took El-Amin's gun. Devon refused to speak with detectives, but his phone put him at the crime scene. The siblings were charged with murder with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, conspiracy to commit robbery, kidnapping with a deadly weapon, and robbery with a deadly weapon. Pirtle Torrance was also charged with murder in connection with the case. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be arrested for a crime your sibling committed in a case of mistaken identity, or find out that your sibling got arrested and tried to blame you for their crime? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe.